The alarm at Forward Operating Base Sentinel could wake the dead. But at 3 in the morning it wasn't supposed to be screaming. General Thyra's roar made it worse. My cubs are gone. The 9-foot-tall alien warrior stood in the doorway of an empty chamber, her golden mane bristling with rage and fear. She looked like a lion that had learned to walk upright, grown to the size of a grizzly bear, and then joined the military. And right now she was a mother whose babies were missing. The secure chamber where her twin cubs should have been sleeping was empty. The tiny nest beds were cold. The security system showed all green lights. No breach, no break-in, nothing. It was like the cubs had just vanished. Colonel Reeves, the human second in command, arrived within 30 seconds. General, we're locking down the base. They can't have gotten far. My cubs are 6 months old, Thyra growled. They can barely hunt. If something has happened to them, we'll find them, Reeves promised, already activating his comm unit. All units code black. I repeat, code black. The general's cubs are missing. Every soldier on the base jolted awake. Within 60 seconds, armed teams were searching every corner of the facility. The armory, clear. The mess hall, empty. The medical bay, nothing. The motor pool, no cubs. What about the human barracks? Someone asked over comms. Sergeant Chin responded, Delta Squad just got back from a 48-hour patrol. They're in mandatory rest cycle. But I'll check. General Thyra's tail lashed back and forth, a sign of extreme agitation in her species. Check everywhere. My cubs are curious about humans. They ask about them constantly. Before we continue, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. While the base erupted in controlled chaos, 3 floors down in the human barracks, Private Jake Mitchell was having the best sleep of his life. He'd been awake for 2 straight days on patrol, watching for enemy movement in the frozen wasteland outside the base. Now, wrapped in his military-grade sleeping bag, he was dead to the world. His face was peaceful and he was even smiling a little. 5 more minutes, Mom, he mumbled in his sleep. His sleeping bag looked weird though. It was way too lumpy, like he'd stuffed extra blankets inside. It was also moving in a strange rhythm, rising and falling in multiple places at once. Private Rodriguez in the next bunk noticed the movement. Mitchell must be having those nightmares again, he muttered, putting in earplugs. Dude always thrashes around after long patrols. But if Rodriguez had listened closer, he would have heard something unusual. A soft purring sound like a massive cat, coming from inside Jake's sleeping bag. And occasionally tiny chirping noises that definitely weren't human. The search team swept through the base like a tsunami. Thermal scanners, motion detectors, even old-fashioned flashlights checking every shadow. But the cubs seemed to have disappeared into thin air. General, Security Chief Thompson called out, I'm checking the surveillance footage. There's something strange. The cameras had a glitch from 0200 to 0205. 5 minutes of static. That's not a glitch, Thyra snarled. That's sabotage. But who would find my cubs first? Questions later. Back in the barracks, Jake shifted in his sleep, unconsciously adjusting his position. The sleeping bag moved with him, and for just a moment, a tiny golden eye peeked out from near the zipper. Then another. 2 small faces, covered in golden fur with black stripes, blinked sleepily at the world before ducking back into the warmth. The security team finally reached the human barracks. Their thermal scanners immediately lit up at Jake's bunk. Sir, I'm reading 3 heat signatures in Private Mitchell's bed. 3? Thompson's voice crackled over comms. Mitchell's got company? Rodriguez jumped up as the security team surrounded Jake's bunk. What's going on? Wake him up. Now. Someone shook Jake's shoulder. His eyes snapped open, years of military training bringing him instantly alert. He found himself staring into a pair of golden eyes about 3 inches from his nose. But they weren't human eyes. Jake said. Hi. A tiny muzzle booped his nose. Warm human. Jake's brain completely stopped working. He was looking at what appeared to be an alien lion cub. Inside his sleeping bag. And it was talking. The sleeping bag suddenly unzipped from the inside, and 2 Leonid cubs tumbled out onto the floor. They were about the size of large house cats, covered in that golden fur with black stripes, and they were both clutching pieces of Jake's undershirt like security blankets. Jake Pack, the smaller one chirped happily. You wake up. The entire barracks stared in shocked silence. Mitchell, Rodriguez said slowly, why are the general's missing cubs in your sleeping bag? The General's what? That's when General Thyra arrived. She filled the entire doorway, all 9 feet of her, and her eyes locked onto her cubs immediately. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Private Mitchell. Her voice could have frozen lava. You have my cubs. Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He was still holding one cub while the other had climbed onto his shoulder. General, I swear, I didn't know they were here. I was asleep. How did they even? The larger cub interrupted cheerfully. We came to find Jake Pack. He gives us the good food. The good food. Thyra's eyes narrowed. Jake's face went red. I might have given them some of my rations yesterday. Through the feeding slot. They looked hungry and were making these sad sounds, and you fed my cubs without permission? They were crying. I couldn't just ignore crying babies. The entire room went silent. Nobody talked back to General Thyra. Nobody. But the cubs were nodding enthusiastically. Jake Pack came back 3 times. Gave us the crunchy things and the sweet squares. Crackers and chocolate, Jake translated weakly. They really seemed to like them. Dr. Chin, the base psychologist, pushed through the crowd. General, may I explain something? Thyra nodded, though her eyes never left Jake and her cubs. What Private Mitchell experienced is completely normal for humans. We have this thing called protective pack bonding. When we see young creatures in distress, any young creatures, our brains make us want to protect them. We literally can't help ourselves. Even predator cubs? Thyra asked, her voice skeptical. Especially predator cubs. On Earth, humans are famous for adopting wolf puppies, bear cubs, even crocodile babies. The more dangerous the adult, the more we want to cuddle the baby. It's kind of our thing. The security chief held up a tablet. General, I've recovered the footage from last night. The screen showed night vision footage of the cubs somehow squeezing through a ventilation grate, their bodies compressing in a way that looked impossible. They'd followed a scent trail through the base, their tiny noses to the ground like bloodhounds. Look, Thompson pointed. Dozens of people walked past that vent. But watch what happens when Private Mitchell goes by. On screen, Jake stumbled past, clearly exhausted. Both cubs immediately perked up, their tails wagging. That's him, one had whispered to the other. The food giver. They tracked him all the way to his bunk. The footage showed them watching him sleep for a few minutes, then the smaller cub made a soft chirping sound. Jake, completely unconscious, had lifted his sleeping bag like he was inviting them in. He made room for them while asleep, Dr. Chin explained. His unconscious mind recognized young creatures needing comfort and responded automatically. General Thyra sat down on a human-sized bunk, which creaked under her weight. The cubs immediately started showing her everything Jake had taught them in just one night. Look, Mama. Jake Pack taught us mouth singing. They tried to whistle. It sounded terrible, but they were so proud. And this. The larger cub held up his paw for a high five, which Jake automatically completed. They learned that in 5 minutes, Jake said, still looking dazed. Thyra studied him for a long moment. Private Mitchell, do you know what it means when Leonid cubs claim someone as pack? No, General. It's permanent. They will always see you as family. As a parent. The barracks erupted in whispers. Jake looked like someone had hit him with a stun weapon. What? General, I don't know anything about raising alien cubs. Jake Pack knows everything, the smaller cub protested, climbing into his lap. Knows warm. Knows safe. Knows play. Knows snacks. The 4 pillars of cub raising, Thyra said, and for the first time she almost smiled. You are now their den parent, Private Mitchell. In my culture this cannot be undone. You will share responsibility for their upbringing. But I just gave them some food. And comfort. And safety. And affection. Thyra stood. Report to my quarters at 0600 hours. Bring the cubs. They need breakfast, and apparently you're the only one who knows what they actually like to eat. As she turned to leave, she paused. Oh, and Mitchell? The paperwork will reflect your new status. Congratulations. You're now the first human to co-parent with a Leonid General. The door closed behind her with a definitive thud. Jake looked down at the 2 cubs who were now trying to fit into his pockets. I just wanted to sleep, he said weakly. Rodriguez patted his shoulder. Dude, you just became a dad to alien warrior cubs. Your life is never going to be normal again. The next morning, Jake arrived at General Thyra's quarters with a cub on each shoulder. They were chirping excitedly about showing him their home den. Thyra's quarters were massive, built to accommodate her size. But in one corner was the cubs' area, and it looked like a prison. Steel walls, reinforced glass, educational tablets, and nothing soft or comfortable anywhere. This is where they live? Jake asked, unable to hide his dismay. It's secure, Thyra said defensively. Temperature controlled. Educational materials provided. It's cold, Jake countered. Where are their toys? Their blankets? Stuffed animals? Stuffed animals? Jake set the cubs down and pulled something from his backpack. It was a worn teddy bear, probably from his own childhood. The cubs' eyes went huge. What is that? They whispered in awe. It's a teddy bear. For cuddling when you sleep or when you're scared. The cubs approached it like it was a religious artifact. The smaller one touched it carefully, then squeaked in delight. It's soft. Mama, it's soft. Within seconds they were fighting over who got to hold it. Jake sighed and pulled out another stuffed animal, a rabbit this time. You brought 2? Thyra asked. I have 6. My mom keeps sending them. She says every soldier needs something soft in all the hardness. For the next hour, Jake taught Thyra things she'd never considered. Leonid cubs needed discipline and training, yes. But they also needed comfort, play, and affection. He showed her human games. Peekaboo had the cubs shrieking with laughter. Patacake taught them rhythm. And when he sang them a lullaby, they immediately tried to memorize it. Your mothering instincts are very developed for a male, Thyra observed. I had 3 younger siblings, Jake explained. And honestly, General, babies are babies. Doesn't matter if they're human or Leonid. They need the same things: love, safety, and someone who cares. Over the next 2 weeks, something amazing happened at the base. Jake would carry the cubs during his duties, teaching them about human culture while Thyra taught them Leonid tradition during her shifts. The cubs thrived with both approaches. Other soldiers started visiting, drawn by the cubs' playfulness. Hardened Marines would stop to play peekaboo. Alien soldiers from other species shared their own child-rearing techniques. The mess hall created a special cub menu, mixing human and Leonid foods. Base morale increased by 50%. Fights between species decreased. Everyone wanted to be the cubs' favorite uncle or aunt. Colonel Reeves noted in his report, Private Mitchell and those cubs have done more for interspecies relations than 10 years of diplomatic protocols. Every evening, a new ritual developed. Jake would read Earth stories while Thyra taught the cubs about their heritage. The cubs absorbed everything, creating their own unique blend of both cultures. Why didn't Goldilocks challenge the bears for den rights? One cub asked during story time, mixing human fairy tales with Leonid customs. Bedtime was the best part. The cubs insisted on sleeping between both their parents. Yes, they'd started calling Jake Papa Jake, and Thyra Mama General. They'd create a nest on the floor with Jake's sleeping bag and Thyra's traditional den bedding. They need both of us, Jake had said simply when Thyra first resisted. They need your strength and my softness. Your wisdom and my warmth. She'd agreed and now secretly treasured these moments, watching her cubs curl up against Jake's warmth while pressed against her protective bulk. Then came the attack. The base alarm screamed at dawn. Enemy forces approaching fast. Jake's first instinct wasn't to grab his weapon, it was to grab the cubs. Safe position, silent mode, he commanded, and they immediately obeyed, climbing into the special carrier he'd modified to fit on his back. Thyra saw him in full combat gear, her cubs secure and protected, and felt something she'd never experienced, complete trust in another parent. They stay with me, Jake said. It wasn't a question. Of course, she agreed. You'll protect them. With my life. The battle was fierce. When communications went down, the cubs volunteered to carry messages. We're small. We're fast. We can use the vents. They'd turned their escape route into a tactical advantage, carrying crucial information between defensive positions. Jake covered them every step, his protective instincts making him lethal to anyone who threatened them. Then enemy forces breached the inner perimeter. A squad cornered them in the medical bay. Jake didn't hesitate. He stood between the cubs and danger, weapon raised. The first plasma shot hit his shoulder. He didn't even flinch. The second hit his ribs. He dropped to one knee but kept firing. The third should have killed him. But he stayed upright through pure determination, still shooting, still shielding the cubs with his body. That's when Thyra arrived. The roar she let out shook the entire building. She tore through the enemy like tissue paper, her maternal rage making her unstoppable. Jake collapsed the moment the threat was gone. Papa Jake, the cubs cried, curling around him, their purring reaching a desperate pitch. In the medical bay, Jake drifted in and out of consciousness while the cubs refused to leave his side. They purred constantly, a healing frequency their species produced for pack members. Their purring is actually helping, the doctor said in amazement. It's promoting cellular regeneration. They're literally healing him because they see him as true family. When Jake finally woke properly, his first word was, "Cubs." "Here, Papa," they chirped, nuzzling his face. "We're here." Thyra watched from beside the bed. "You almost died protecting them." "They're my cubs," Jake said simply, as if that explained everything. And to Thyra it did. A month later, the base held its first interspecies adoption ceremony. Jake stood in his dress uniform, now decorated with Leonid clan symbols. The cubs wore matching tiny uniforms he'd had specially made. Thyra stood in her ceremonial armor, proud and regal. The ritual was simple but profound. Jake had to prove his strength. He lifted both cubs easily, his wisdom, he recited their care needs perfectly, and his love, the cubs vouched for him so enthusiastically that everyone laughed. Thyra drew her claw gently across Jake's face, leaving ceremonial marks. "Your clan. Your family. You are Leonid." The cubs launched themselves at him, and the entire assembly erupted in cheers. High Command took notice. The Mitchell Protocol was born, a new program where humans could volunteer to help raise alien young on integrated basis. The results were staggering. 75% reduction in stress, 60% improvement in performance, 100% boost in morale. Humans have a unique trait, Thyra explained at the military conference. They pack bond with anything young. They can't help but protect and nurture. It's their greatest strength. Jake, now promoted to sergeant with special duties as interspecies family liaison, added, "And alien young teach us about strength, loyalty, and courage." It's a perfect exchange. 6 months later, new recruits arrived at FOB Sentinel, now the model base for the integration program. Young aliens of various species waited eagerly to meet the humans, having heard stories about Papa Jake and his cubs. "What if we're not good with kids?" one nervous private asked. The cubs, now much bigger but still playful, answered, "Jake Papa wasn't either. We trained him. Just be warm, give snacks and play. Everything else happens naturally." In the evening, the family quarters were a perfect blend of both worlds. Jake read reports while the cubs practiced combat moves Thyra had taught them. When Jake's family called from Earth, his sister squealed at seeing the cubs. "Are those my nephews?" "Aunt Sister," the cubs shouted excitedly. "When you visit, we show you our teeth. Very sharp. You'll be proud." At bedtime, the cubs were supposed to sleep in their own beds now, proper young warriors in training. But every night, without fail, they'd sneak back to Jake's sleeping bag. Jake and Thyra would pretend not to notice, both smiling in the darkness. "They still do it," Thyra whispered one night. "Sneak into your sleeping bag." "Yeah," Jake whispered back. "And you let them. Strong warriors need safe dens. And warm families." The cubs, not as asleep as they pretended, murmured together, "Need both. Have both. Perfect." The Mitchell Protocol spread across the galaxy within a year. Hundreds of bases implemented the program. Thousands of human volunteers stepped forward. Millions of alien young found comfort, safety, and love in human arms. But it all started with 2 scared cubs, 1 exhausted soldier, and a sleeping bag that became the safest place in the universe. Jake's mother sent him a message that he kept forever. "I always knew you'd change the world, sweetheart. I just didn't know you'd do it by being the galaxy's best big brother." Looking at his cubs, his children, teaching newer younglings how to high-five while Thyra instructed them in combat stances, Jake realized his mom was wrong about one thing. He wasn't the galaxy's best big brother. He was a dad. A dad to 2 alien warrior cubs who'd escaped their secure chamber, infiltrated a military barracks, and crawled into his sleeping bag looking for something their own species couldn't give them: soft, warm, unconditional human love. And that made all the difference in the universe. The official military archives would record the Mitchell Protocol as humanity's greatest contribution to galactic peace. Not through weapons or technology, but through the simple, powerful human instinct to protect and love any child who needed it. Even if those children had fangs, claws, and a habit of escaping from maximum security chambers to cuddle in sleeping bags. Especially then.